What is the biggest block in Sino-Indian ties? Why India and China standoffs repeat? Why the line of actual control has been undefined for so many years? And how these agreements exist only on papers. In the times of US tariff, India is opening up to the reapproachment seen from China's end. But here lies the problem. Line of actual control. Even after 7 decades of independence, India and China mutually have not decided on the border, and this is the main conflict because of which we see standoffs again and again, be it from 1962 war to the Galwan Valley clash. Hello everyone, welcome to Vajiram and Ravi's Flash News. My name is Shubhangi Singh, and today we are going to understand this very core issue, line of actual control, which has been there and has been responsible for the clashes between India and China, and how the resolution of it can actually bring the normalization of ties between India and China. So let us go through the timeline and understand that how both of the countries have this core issue, they have tried to resolve it, how their ties have evolved, and other things. So if we start with understanding the core issue itself, so the core issue is about the border dispute. The border that is shared is of 3,488 kilometers long, and the line of actual control is disputed. It is not mutually agreed on. Now when we are talking about this, let us understand the disputed sectors. We have 3 disputed sectors. The first, eastern sector, that is in Arunachal Pradesh. The second is the middle one, which is in Himachal and Uttarakhand, the borders that are shared there, and then the western sector, which is of Aksai Chin. Now when we are talking about the issue arises from the fact that the legacy which was left by the Britishers after their imperial rule, we only had colonial era maps which highlighted 2 main borders. The first one being the Johnson line, which is highlighted in blue here. The other one being the McMahon line, that is highlighted in red here. Now this was assumed by India as the border. India ने मान लिया कि ये border है, but China ने इन borders पर कभी भी agree नहीं किया और इसको contest करते रहे. तो India agreed on the borders, China contested this, and the failure of defining a proper line of control, line of actual control and the borders between India and China has been haunting their relationship till date, be it diplomatic, be it trade, be it the consulates, what not. Now this is why we see a regular clash between these countries and a certain amount of mistrust that exists even at their peak of relationship. Now let us understand that how it all began. So if we talk about the time just after the independence, the first phase from 1947 to almost 1962, this was the phase when our Indian leadership believed in the honesty, the trustworthiness of the neighbors, and this slogan was also born back then where we talked Hindi-Chini Bhai-Bhai. In 1954, we came up with a Panchsheel agreement which was signed, but remember that there was no border resolution in this agreement. This Panchsheel agreement talked about 5 principles that both of the countries will follow. What were the 5 principles? The first one being mutual respect for the territorial integrity and sovereignty, mutual respect or non-interference in the internal matters. The fourth was the important one, mutual non-aggression, and 5th, peaceful coexistence. Even after such an agreement, less than in a decade, we had fought the 1962 war with China. How did it happen? So do you remember we talked about the McMahon line, that how it was the colonial legacy that was left with us. Now if we talk about the McMahon line and Johnson line, based on that you can understand that it was assumed that this particular area lies with India. Now China started heavy construction in this very area, which remained unnoticed by India. Given for the time that we are talking about late 1950s, back then there were no drones, no radars, limited military expenditure that was happening from our nation. In such a situation, it went unnoticed for a very long time. And when it was noticed by India, that was the time where India went ahead with the forward policy and it triggered the 1962 war, where China won decisively and we also lost Aksai Chin. And that is when LAC, that is line of actual control, emerged as a de facto boundary. So, line of actual control, which is this emerged not as an accepted boundary. This still remains an integral part of our country, but it is illegally occupied by China and it became a de facto boundary because China unilaterally announced the ceasefire. It never returned back the parts. There was no discussion on it and we lost Aksai Chin to them. Now, this was when our relationship dipped to the worst point and all the build-up that was seen in the positive direction, be it Panchsheel Agreement, be it the slogan that we were talking about, all of it was lost. Now, coming to the second phase. That means just after the war, the tensions had risen, the relationship had dropped to the last, and between the phase of 1962 to 1993, there were continuous skirmishes that were seen. For example, Nathula, 1967, then we also had Chola clash that was in Sikkim. That is where we found India successful. However, if we talk about the Galwan Valley clash, it was in 1975, that was last firing incident that we had seen, and then after 45 years we had to see it in Galwan Valley. So that happened in Tulungla. So this all highlights that how tensions were peaking, the mistrust was at peak, and there a cold peace that was going on, especially till 1976 when finally the diplomatic ties were restored. Can you tell me in the comment section who was the Prime Minister of our country in 1976? And then it is credited to Rajiv Gandhi. Then in 1988, it was his visit that normalized a lot of things between India and China. And after this, there was a renewed effort that was taken to solve this, bring a resolution to the border dispute. So when we are talking about the border dispute, joint working group was established that worked from 1988 to 1993. There were meeting of commanders, military commanders who met at Bamla in Chusul. 1992, border trade was finally resumed after 30 years. We fought the war in 1962, after 30 years in 1992, the border trade resumed. A similar thing you have seen in recent times. After Galwan Valley clash, our trade had stopped and finally border trade has resumed through Lipu Lake Pass. So this was when we are seeing things to be better and there was work in terms of resolution of border dispute, because this was very important to remove the animosity, to remove the mistrust, और यहाँ पे situations better करने के लिए और कोई रास्ता नहीं है. जो core issue है, जब तक उसको चाइना और इंडिया address नहीं करेंगे, उस पे काम नहीं करेंगे, तो हमेशा ये problems जो हैं उनके लिए खड़ी रहेंगी. After this, we also saw that the peace, the focal point was seen through key agreements that were signed in 1993 and 1996. So when we are talking about 1993, that is BPTA, Border Peace and Tranquility Agreement, BPTA. That means there will be no use of force. Both of the countries will be respecting LAC, that is line of actual control that I just showed you in the map, and there will be minimal forces along the border. Furthermore, this was the first document, you have to understand, BPTA was the first document which talked about line of actual control and it formally finally mentioned it. Then in 1996, we signed CBBM, that is confidence building measures were taken. In this confidence building measure, there were talk about limited armaments. That means there will be limited tanks, limited artillery, limited missiles. There will be avoidance of any sort of large scale exercise near LAC. And there was the most important part, that the maps will be exchanged between the countries to clarify on the line of actual control, where it actually lies, and the process of it, which was also started. Now, the process which began in 1996 took solid shaping in the 2000s. But when we are talking about 2000, when central sector maps they were exchanged, then when we are talking about 2002, western sector map exchange was supposed to happen, but it collapsed in 20 minutes. Why? Both of the countries showed maximalist claims. That means none of them were ready to accept, especially on this end, we can put it towards China. Then 2005, finally the efforts which were peaking towards peace, they were abandoned and no efforts were taken after this, and that is why the confusion, non-clarity continued to persist. Major disputed areas such as Depsang, Pangang So or Samar Langpa, which resulted in the ambiguity, the clashes that we have seen. What happened as a result? The agreements that we talked about, be it BPTA, be it CBM of 1993 and 1996 respectively, they just merely existed on paper, even be it the Panchsheel agreement. Nothing of that sort materialized in reality. And then we again saw the modern reshaping or the modern repetition of the 1962 version, where we had the Doklam standoff because the China built a road in the Bhutanese territory very close to the tri-junction of India, Bhutan and China, and this standoff 73 days it lasted. India also intervened in this, and that is why this was a tension laden period that we had seen. Apart from that, Galwan Valley clash, we all remember 2020, when there was a hand-to-hand combat because the armaments are limited there and 20 Indian soldiers were martyred. China never went ahead and disclosed the numbers, but it is said that it is almost 4x of this number in terms of casualty at China's end. This was the first deadly clash that we had seen in 45 years, and this resulted in massive troop buildup from both ends, which were disagreed on, the non-aggression which was agreed on, and the disengagement has been very much limited or non-existent. However, the conversations have finally restarted, the trade has resumed, and China and India are sitting on the same table for conversations about de-escalation, sorting out their issues and coming together for global stability. But the question remains the same: will the LAC will be defined and mutually agreed upon? When it will be done? Because till the time it is not being done, everything remains in ambiguity and China's tendencies cannot be trusted. Now that was all from my side. Thank you so much.